welcome back to another online lesson. My name is Mr. Hoven. If you remember from last time, we were talking about how the states and their representatives were fed up with the Articles of Confederation and sought to find a new government which gave the federal government a little bit more power while taking some away from the states. And in turn, they created the Constitution. Now, across the nation, Americans were discussing the new Constitution. The Constitutional Convention had done its work. It had given a document for the setup, the creation of a new government. Now, in the fall of 1787, the debates began. Each state had to decide whether or not to ratify the new framework of government. And keep in mind, ratify means to accept or approve this new government. Now, the Constitution was sent to Congress along with a letter from George Washington, which praised the document as something that would always preserve the country that these people so loved. Now, 9 of the 13 states had to ratify. They had to approve the Constitution before it would go into effect. Voters in each state elected representatives to state conventions, and at these state conventions, representatives would debate on ratifying the Constitution, whether they would ratify or whether they would not ratify the Constitution. Now, when the representatives began debating over the Constitution in their state conventions, two groups really began to surface. There were those in favor of a strong federal government or national government, and these were known as Federalists. They were in favor of the Constitution. And disputing them were the Anti-Federalists. These are people who were opposed to the Constitution, believed that states should have the power, and they were happy with the way the government was at that point. Now, the Federalists had a very poignant opinion on the Constitution and the need for a stronger central government. They argued that the Articles of Confederation left too much power with the individual states. This imbalance produced a dangerously weak central government. Disputes among states, Federalists said, made it too difficult for the government to function. They couldn't get anything accomplished. They also believed that the Constitution gave the national government the authority it needed to function effectively. In order to get things done, you need to give a little bit more power to the federal government. And furthermore, they argued that the Constitution still would protect the rights of individual states. With this being said, the Federalists knew that they needed to spread some literature or propaganda, if you will, about the Constitution and the good it would do for not only the country but the American citizens. So Federalists James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay began to compose a series of papers, and these were known as the Federalist Papers. Their purpose was to explain and defend the Constitution. These individuals used pen names, but most people knew who they were. Today, the Federalist Papers remains one of the biggest discussions of the political theory behind the American system of government. So they began to spread their ideas through literature to help convince people that, yes, the Constitution was the thing they needed to solve the government problems. Now, on the other side of this argument were the Anti-Federalists, and these individuals felt that the Constitution made the national government too strong and the state governments too weak. Furthermore, they thought that the Constitution gave too much power to the president, and they were fearful of that because, if you remember, when they were under the control of Great Britain, King George was seen as a tyrant who exacted his will on the people, and they wanted to avoid that. They didn't want it to happen again. And their biggest objection was that their Constitution had no Bill of Rights to protect the individual rights of citizens of America. So they made a very compelling argument for the reasons not to ratify the Constitution. Well, after the debating had come to a close, it was time to ratify, or not ratify for that matter, the Constitution. One by one, the states began to vote. Delaware led the way, ratifying on December 7th, 1787. Pennsylvania and New Jersey were very shortly to follow thereafter. In February 1788, Massachusetts, after quite a lengthy debate, ratified, and this was the 9th state to ratify. Now, it wouldn't be again until June where New Hampshire decided to ratify. And Virginia, in that same year, votes to ratify on one condition, and that was that there would be a Bill of Rights added to the Constitution. And this was something that was a key issue for most Anti-Federalists, and why some states began to swing towards ratifying, because there was a guarantee that there would be a Bill of Rights stating the rights of the people added to the Constitution. Now, in July 1788, New York finally voted to ratify, and the final holdout, May 29, 1790, was Rhode Island, and they finally voted to ratify, which set the process in motion for the acceptance of the Constitution and the nomination of the first president, along with now being starting to consider what would be in that Bill of Rights. Now, once the Constitution was ratified, Americans voted in their first election under the Constitution in January 1789. As expected, George Washington was elected president, while John Adams was chosen as vice president. The first Congress met in New York City, which was chosen as the nation's first capital. Congress quickly turned its attention to adding a Bill of Rights to the Constitution. Remember, several states agreed to ratify the Constitution on the promise that a Bill of Rights would be added. So, the Bill of Rights was written. It was composed by James Madison, and these ended up being the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. These state the natural-born rights of all human beings, and they led to the Constitution becoming a living document that grows and changes along with the nation. I hope you've enjoyed this online lesson. In class, we'll be looking at what these 10 amendments were and how they still affect us today, hundreds of years after the document was written. We'll see you next time.